And we're ready. Go ahead, Mike.
Great. Well, hi everybody. It's great to have the opportunity to come in and talk to you today. I really appreciate that. Besides myself, Christine Lampies here is running the video camera, so I appreciate Christine volunteering to help out with that, and her husband Michael came along also to help with any tech things. So I really do appreciate the help. So welcome to our farm. Basically, my wife and I started Ridgedale Orchard and Vineyard about 8 years ago, basically as a retirement, something doing a retirement. Well, it's definitely turned out to be something to do, that's for sure, because we're always busy with all the things we're doing here. But we're not that large. We have like 3 acres here in Lake Matthews, and we grow about 80 different kinds of fruits, berries, grapes on our property. We also are growing quite a few herbs now too. So we make jams, jellies, syrups, dried fruits, and also herbal teas. And that's basically what we do with the property here. And it's, like I say, a retirement project that we've had going now for the last 8 years. So anyway, welcome to Ridgedale Orchard and Vineyard. I'm standing in front of my olalaberry patch today, and we're going to talk about berries. And what I want to do is talk about the berries that we grow here and kind of our experience with those different types of berries and what we've done in growing those. And so the blackberries we grow are like the olalaberries behind us. We also grow the boysenberries. We'll also be talking Chester blackberries, and we grow raspberries also on the property. Besides that, we do have some gooseberries, and we're going to talk a little bit about gooseberries. It's going to be pretty short about gooseberries, and you'll find out why in a few minutes. Besides those, we're also going to have a little chat about elderberries. The elderberries are kind of interesting. The more you get into and learn about elderberries, the more interesting that berry really is. And then we're going to wrap it up with talking about some goji berries. So let's get started with the blackberries and understand. Now, if you're already growing blackberries, you may really understand a lot about it, how to prune them, how to grow them, and that's great. I'm hoping today maybe there's some things that you might pick up that you weren't thinking about, or maybe it might be helpful. So I want to start out with kind of the anatomy, and I pulled an olalaberry out of the ground. Here's one right here. And I wanted to show you this so you understand kind of the anatomy of this berry. And this is pretty big. This is a couple of things you need to really understand about berries if you don't already. They fruit basically on the previous year's growth. So this year's growth is called the primocane, and that's what this big green, beautiful cane coming up here. That's a primocane, and that's going to get berries on it next year. Now this dead section right here, in fact, it's kind of breaking off right here. It's already dried up and dying. This was the floricane. This was last year's primocane. It's this year's floricane, and that's where the fruit was going to be on this particular berry. And as you can see, it's kind of small. This one's kind of growing off to the side, kind of a sucker growing out of the ground. But the other thing to note on this is the root system. It's pretty small. If you take a look at it, it doesn't have a very deep root system, and we're going to talk about that as we go along. So basically, this is the anatomy. Now these are laterals that are coming out over the side here that you see coming out. We're going to talk about how to prune this thing in a few minutes. This was really a pretty big cane that came out, but it's got several laterals on it, and this primocane is probably about 7 feet tall, I'd say, close to 8 feet. So that's basically the anatomy of this. What's important to understand is the green part is the primocane. That's this year's growth. No berries this year, but we'll get berries next year. And the little dead section you saw at the bottom that's already dried up, this had berries on it earlier in the year. So I'm going to set this aside for a few minutes, and then we're going to talk about it maybe a little later when we have some other things that relate to it that might be important to it. So What's important to understand on these berries is there's basically two types. You've got your trailing berries and you've got your more erect type berries. The trailing berries would be like the Olalla berry just showed you, the boysenberry. We go the Chester blackberry. That would be an erect berry. It grows more in a upward. It doesn't trail down as much. They do need a trellis, even though they're called an erect berry. But you really do need a trellis for it, and that's really important. To propagate these berries, they're really simple to propagate if you want to do that. And basically, wherever these primicanes, as they grow, and usually they're on the ground because they're not up on the trellis yet, they'll root wherever the tips touch the ground. They're going to root, and you've got a new berry, a new bush at that stage that you can start. And so that's one of the ways that you can propagate these. They're really easy to do so. The other thing that's kind of important with the berries is that they like a slightly acidic soil, so about around 5.5 to 6.5 pH for the soil is fine for these berries. If your soil is we have very sandy soil here, so we had to amend it to some degree in some areas. Fortunately, in one area where we were growing our boysenberries, that area hadn't been really worked at all on this property. There was a big tree there that would fall over every year. It was a native tree. It would get rotten and fall over, so it created its own mulch, and that area was actually perfect for growing these berries. But you may need to amend the soil a little bit if you find that you need to do that. When you're planting your berries, best time is in the dormant season when they're bare root. That's the best time to do it. But you can do it in the springtime. You can even do it through the summer. It got a little hot this last couple of weeks. That wouldn't be the best time to plant. But you can buy potted plants if you like and plant those, and that's not a problem at all. You can grow them that way. When you plant them, you want to make sure that you are amending the soil. If your soil does not have a lot of compost in it or nutriments in the soil, you want to amend that. And it's always best to mulch around these berries so that you can keep them moist. That's really great. When you do plant them, especially a bare root one, you want to cut it back to about 6 inches high. You want to cut it back so it will grow out from there. Don't just plant it and let it go from there. You want to cut it back. That's a pretty important thing to do. You can also plant these anywhere from usually around 3 feet. You can go as much as 4. We planted them 3 feet on center on all of our berries, but you can go within 3 to 4 feet is a pretty good distance. Now, you are going to have to use a trellis when you put up these berries, or grow it. If you have a single berry, you can grow it on a wall or something. And when you set up a trellis like the ones we have here, basically there's a 3-wire trellis. Basically, the first wire is at 2 feet, the second wire is at 4, and the third wire is right at about 5.5 and 6 feet. And then you can have posts in between the end posts about every 20 feet or so. Your end post should be fairly sturdy, but one of the things we did, we actually use these T-posts, but I went and I don't know if you can, hopefully Christine can zoom in on this. We put in 2x2 pieces to basically hold that T-post in place, so when it gets pulled in, it'll stay in place very nicely. And there's little concrete pads that I put underneath those 2x2s. That seemed to work pretty well. It was a lot less expensive, because if you're buying fence posts for these, it gets really very, very expensive. And this worked out really well for us, though. The other thing too, they're pretty heavy feeders, and that's really important. You want to make sure that you're getting them fertilized adequately. In general, they require about 1 pound of nitrogen for about every 100 feet of plants that you have. Now, when you're doing that, that means that if you're putting down inorganic, then, and let's say you have a balance like a 20-20-20, then you're going to need about 5 pounds of that for every 100 feet that you go through. If you're putting in organic and you're using compost, and you're going to need about 50 or 60 pounds of compost that you're going to have to put around those plants. The compost at that point, you want to put it down in the fall before the winter, the rain start, obviously, so you can get those nutriments to wash into the ground. If you're using inorganic fertilizers, chemical fertilizers, then you can do that just just before they start to break any. You see the leaf buds breaking. Just before that is when you want to actually put that fertilizer on the berries.
Quick question for you, Mike. What material do you find best for the trellis, wood or metal?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, you can use, if you want to use wood, you can do that. You need to have at least a 4x4 type post. The problem with wood, and the reason I didn't use wood, is because it's going to rot in a lot of cases. Even if you sink it into concrete, you may have a problem with it actually rotting. Now, you can use end posts for like chain link fence. That's ideal probably, but those critters are pretty expensive. Especially with this little patch right here, we've got 13 rows, so that's 23 end posts I'd need. That's quite a bit of money to put together. So what I did is I used 7-foot T-posts, and like I said, they're in the ground about 1'18" and then I used a wood brace to brace them, to hold them in place. I put a little notch at the top of that wood brace to hold that in place, and that seems to work really well. There's not a lot of pressure on these vines, there really isn't. So that's a good thing. They're not like grapes where you really need a really sturdy end post. So I was able to do it this way, and it seemed to work pretty well. But you can go either way, wood or metal. Just keep in mind the durability of the metal as opposed to the wood. But a great question. Appreciate that.
Thanks for the answer.
Great. And then as we go along, folks, if you do have questions, please go ahead and post them in the comment section so we can, and Kurt will go ahead and bring those up. So let's talk about irrigation. These are not drought-tolerant plants, for sure. They like water, and as a general rule, you're going to put down about 1 inch of water per 1 to 2 inches, really, per plant. That's about 20 gallons a week for these plants. That's really important to get them watered correctly. The way we have it set up on a drip line, and our drip line is set up so that we have an emitter every foot, so that we're keeping that whole line moist. That's what we're attempting to do. Now, you don't have to keep in between the rows moist, but you do want to keep it moist as you go through the row itself. Now, the other thing is you want to mulch pretty heavily so that you can hold this moisture in place. Now, remember when we were looking at this plant, let me grab this plant again. This is really, you really see the picture of this. If you look at this root, this guy was coming like this. It was actually growing on an angle. So this root wasn't really going down that far. It was growing more like that. And if you look at this whole root structure, it's not much more than about 3 or 4 inches deep into the soil. That's important to understand when you're doing your watering. And something I really learned as I went along, because I originally was watering these for like 6-8 hours, just like it was a lot of my other trees. And it didn't make any sense because the roots only go down about 3 inches. And we have pretty sandy soil here. So originally I was wasting a lot of water. So I switched over to adding emitters every foot. And then we changed our watering pattern to virtually every other day, especially once they start to flower and fruit, every other day to keep the soil moist. And we only ran the system for about 2 hours, 3 hours max, but usually 2 hours, and every other day. And that basically kept the soil moist all the time, and our productivity went up, it skyrocketed, and our water bill went down because we were actually using less water overall because we were really grossly overwatering per watering session, where we should have had a lot less, a lot more sessions, but less time duration of that watering, and that's really important. Now, one of the things that we really lucked out on with this Olala berry patch you see right here is that we've got like like an artesian type water that comes through here, and it's basically underground, but it bubbles up almost right in the middle of this patch and comes right down through the middle of it and actually puddles up right where I'm standing. And if I in the springtime, if I dig a hole even a foot deep, it'll be full of water within minutes. So we're extremely fortunate that we have all this water coming through here, and all the berries right in this whole section produce the best of any of the berries on the property, because they get so much water here, and that's really a really an advantage to us that we didn't know that we had until we actually got going. And every year it seems like this flow gets a little heavier for some reason. I don't know if it's because the rains came so late last year, but it was a huge flow of water coming through here. And now we're looking at ways that we can actually harvest some of this and move it to other parts of the berry patch here, that either here or the boysenberries, which are a little further to my right here, and utilize that water. But it's really important that you make sure that you're watering your berries correctly. Like I mentioned, we use the drip emitters. I'm sure you've seen these emitters. I really like these. We use 1 gallon emitters. That's what these little black ones are. The little green ones are 2 gallons. I really specifically like these because you can actually take these little critters apart if they get plugged, and occasionally that will happen. You can take them apart, clean them up. There's a little diaphragm in there, put them back together again, and I really like using this type of emitter. It works really well. We use these on all of wherever we're using emitters. This is the type that we use. So watering is obviously really important to these berries, and once they come out of dormancy and they start to flower, that's when we make sure that we're keeping the soil moist on a day-to-day basis. And we'll do that all the way through until we harvest the berries. Once we've harvested them, then we'll back off a little bit, and it would be great if we didn't, but you know, the water bill starts going really high at that stage, so we have to back off a little bit. They get stressed a little bit, especially when we get this hot weather, but we still you know, continue to water to make sure that we're not, you know, going to really stress them out 100%, but so that they die or something. But we do back off mainly because of the cost of the water. So that's really important. So let's talk about pruning. So I'm going to grab this one I pulled out of the ground here. Now this is this year's growth. So this is a primocane, and as you can see, the floricane from last year at the bottom of this has died off on us. So this one, I'm going to put it down so the roots are basically at ground level. And you can see that we've got these laterals coming out fairly low. And then as we bring it up, we've got more laterals coming up here at about 5 feet and 6 feet up and so forth. So what we're going to do is we would bring these up. And, you know, one thing I didn't do, I should have brought was we have a little machine that we use for actually hooking these onto the trellis instead of tying them on, because we have total probably 1,700 feet of berries. So we have a little machine that we use for tying these on. We just put it on and press it, and it'll tie the berry onto the wire. So that makes it very helpful. But what we would do is we're going to cut this at about 5 feet, 4.5, 5 feet, right about in here somewhere at the top of that trellis. We'll cut it here, and these laterals we're going to cut at about 8 inches. And we're going to cut this one and the one over here. This top one we would probably cut right about here. This top would all go away. It's gone. It's going to be hooked up to the trellis. And these lower laterals, I will usually bring these up to the wire. If they'll go all up to the wire, and then I'll cut them at that length also. I won't cut them back as far, because wherever you cut them back, they're going to branch out, and that's where you're going to get fruit. And so if you cut these way down here, then the problem's going to be you're always bending over to get your fruit. But if you cut them up in this, have them up in this range right into here, then as you walk through to pick your berries, they're a lot easier to find because you know approximately where they're going to be, because all of these little nodes right in here are going to branch out, and that's where your berries are actually going to be, right in this section from here, from right about where my hand is, up to about right here. And so as you look for your berries, they're going to be pretty easy to find because that's where they're all going to be. Now, it's important that when you're pruning these, that you make sure you have the right canes. Now, you can do these as soon as they're done fruiting, if you'd like. A lot of folks do that. But the problem is it's kind of hard to tell the floricane from the primocane because they're both green at that stage. And if you cut the primocane, you won't have any berries next year. You'll be cutting the wrong one. The master gardeners at their grow lab in Riverside have kind of a unique way of doing this. They go in and they actually whitewash all of the primocanes with some whitewash. So then when they get to the next season, they know which one is which. That's a pretty unique way to do it. That's pretty cool. What we do is we actually prune these during the dormant season. And it's real obvious. It's even obvious right now. If you look behind me, you'll see a lot of brown. Those are all of this year's floricanes that are dying. They're dead. They're not going to produce any more fruit, obviously. We'll cut those off in the wintertime. And the reason we do it in the wintertime, it's basically a practical thing for us. Number one, we have more time available to us in the winter than we do during the summer or fall. And the second problem is we actually have a lot of snakes around here, which are great for the gophers, but we've got a few rattlers too. And I don't want to be walking into this patch because I have seen snakes go in here, in and out. And the last thing I do want to do is take a chance on getting bit by any rattlesnakes. So it's purely a practical thing for us as to why we prune all of these out during the dormant season. But you can prune off your floricanes once they've done fruiting anytime after they've actually fruited. Either way, you can do that. As far as pests are concerned, we haven't had a lot of problems here at all with ours, and I've been happy about that. We're out in the country, obviously. We have a lot of birds. The birds are always going through. They don't seem to bother the berries too much, but they are getting the insects, so that's a good thing for us. Some of the things you might run into, and I've had people tell me that they've had the problem, is fruit flies, and you'll get the little worms on your berries. Now, not so much the earlier berries, such as the Olala berry and the boysenberry, but you will see it on the later berries. We like I say, we grow the Chester blackberry, and those are later in the season. And one of the things you can do, you can get one of these McPhail fruit fly traps. These work pretty good. You can set some of these out. You bait it with a yeast bait, and you can basically catch these little pesky fruit flies. These work great for olives too. If you get the same similar type of fruit fly in your olives. But that's one of the ways you can get rid of them. Usually once you see them, it's pretty hard to get rid of them at that stage. But if you can catch them before they get too out of control, then you'll be fairly successful with it. Now, the next thing I wanted to talk about was boysenberries. Now, there's quite a bit of difference. A lot of people think, well, especially folks who aren't real, that they're the same, but they're completely different as far as how you handle the boysenberry versus the blackberries. There's basically three different kinds of boysenberries you're going to, raspberries you're going to find out here. On the red raspberries, you've got the summer ones that produce fruit during the summer. You have the red ones that produce fruit during the fall, and then you have the black raspberries. Now there is an orange or a yellow, bright golden raspberry. You may see those, but those are basically almost the same as the red summer-bearing raspberries, only they're orange or kind of a gold color. So what's the difference between these? Well, one of the big difference is where they actually grow. So when you look at your summer fruiting raspberries, they are going to, most of those will grow in really cold climates. They don't do that well here in Southern California. They really don't. And hence, you really don't normally see those in the nursery. You can probably buy them online, but your success in growing them may be minimal because they like that cooler temperature. Now, the fall blooming ones will grow quite well in Southern California. They'll take the heat, but they don't like the heat. But you can get a crop out of them, and those are the ones that you'll normally find in the nurseries. We grow mainly the heritage raspberry. We've had pretty good success with that. Last year, I did buy a couple of Bubbas to see how they would do, because they're supposed to hold up in the heat much better than the heritage. But frankly, I haven't seen them producing that well, and I can't say that they're all that much do that much better in the heat than the heritage are. I know this what they don't like is this really heavy hot temperatures we've had, over 100 degrees for what, 10, 15 days, getting 112 degrees. They really burn up at that stage. They'll burn the leaves, they'll burn the fruits. It's really hard to grow them out in the sun at that point. And it's really best if you can grow them so that they get some kind of shade in the afternoon. We're actually going to start using about a 30% shade cloth. I'm going to do that next year because I've had the problem the last couple of years now where we've burnt some of these berries, and they'll grow much better if you can give them some shade in the afternoon. Okay. Now, the other difference between these berries is how you actually prune them. So when you're looking at the red raspberry that the summer producing ones, the pruning on that is similar to the pruning I just showed you. You're going to get the primocane coming up, and you can cut that back, and then you're going to get the floricane the next year. They're going to fruit on the previous year's growth. You're going to cut them a little shorter than we do the blackberries. But when you look at the fall, and like I say, you're probably not going to grow those. If you do, you're probably not going to, it's going to be minimum if you want to try those. You'll probably have to go online to actually find those summer blooming raspberries. But the fall ones, you'll definitely find those in the nurseries, and they'll grow really well. And there's two ways you can do that. You can go ahead and prune them back on the after they've fruited on that floricane. You can prune that back, and you'll actually get a crop the following fall on that, and then you'll get new shoots coming up, or spring rather, in early summer on that shoot, and then you'll get new shoots coming up, and those you can get berries on in the fall, late summer and fall. And that's the way I was growing my heritage when I first got them, and for several years. But then 2 years ago, I changed that completely, because the other process you can do is you can completely cut them all the way to the ground at the end of the season. And because when they come up, actually, you will get fruit on next year's growth. And so that's what I did. I started that about 3 years ago, and we get actually a much better crop when we do that. The flavor seemed to be even better too. That seemed kind of strange to me, but we got a much stronger, much larger crop, and it's a lot easier to do because now all I have to do is go in, cut everything back, we're done, let it grow in, and then we harvest our fruit. And normally we actually have started harvesting probably maybe this weekend. We might start picking some raspberries out there. We've gotten a few of them. Like I said, this heat has really set them back. I'm not sure how big a crop we're going to get this year, but we'll get berries all the way until going into October on these heritage berries. So that's basically raspberries and the ones that we grow and how we go about it. The other thing I wanted to talk about was currants and gooseberries. Well, I tried some gooseberries, and because I wanted to see if we could get them to grow here in Southern California, and it's really, really difficult to do. And the variety we we tried was called Pixwell. It's supposed to be able to handle the heat better than any of the other gooseberries. And we put, I don't know, about 10 of those in, and they grow fine, but the problem is they don't produce very much fruit, mainly because it just gets too warm here. And so, you know, if you want to try to grow them, you can, but you're going to need to water them virtually every day. You're going to have to put, we have them in the coldest part of our property, and we still have problems getting them to do any fruiting. So, you know, it's not really something that you may want to get into. The other thing is that they're a carrier for the pine blister rust, which affects pine trees. And if you have sugar pine or white pines on your property, you definitely do not want to plant these because they could cause some problems with your pine trees. So, as I mentioned earlier, my conversation on gooseberries is going to be very short, and it is because you know, you really are going to have a difficult time trying to grow these here in Southern California. So elderberries. So elderberries are really, really interesting. The more I find out about elderberries, the more curious I get about growing these. What we're growing is the American elderberry, and it seems to do really well in this area. I've even read somewhere where they say they're kind of drought tolerant. I don't really buy that because they do require as much water as these caneberries do, and that's really important. So they do require a lot of water. They will withstand the heat, but they won't produce as well if you're not watering them properly. So that's really important. For pruning the elderberries, mainly you can grow them as a bush, and that's how most people do. They sucker quite heavily. And what you want to do is just kind of cut back to open up the bush so it gets more light into it. You know, they basically fruit on the new growth. So any older growth you want to cut out and cut back so that you stimulate the tree to grow more new growth, and that's basically where you're going to get your berries. So that's pretty important to do. You can grow them as a small tree if you want to take one single cane and grow it up and cut the others back, but you're constantly going to be cutting back those suckers because that's really something you're going to find that they do quite a bit. The other thing about elderberries is you don't want to eat them right off of the bush because they're actually toxic. You need to cook them. That's really important. That's why you always hear about elderberry wine or elderberry preserves or pies. They're always usually used cooking as opposed to just picking them off the bush and eating them. So that's really important. In fact, the entire tree or bush could be toxic. So you want to use caution there. There's several different cultivars out there. One of them is called Adams. There's another one called Jones. There's another one called Yorks. These have been hybridized to get a larger berry. And I would suggest you might look, if you're interested in doing elderberries, you might want to look into that. You can start them from cuttings. In fact, I brought one over here, and this is a small one. This was actually started in September. Actually 27th of last year from this little, and you can see it's a hardwood cutting. It's about maybe 5 inches long. I've noticed that a lot of them will actually sprout from like a suckers type thing coming out from that cutting. I'd say about 50% of them. That's how they actually start growing. Some will actually sprout from the top up here. This would probably be a lot bigger if I'd put it into a larger pot. I basically was planning on planting it in the ground from here to see how it does. They are self-pollinating, but if you have two different varieties, you'll get a lot more fruit when they're cross-pollinating. So that's helpful also. So we basically have two plants we've taken them from, but they are easy to grow from cuttings. I virtually got probably 80% success in when I started these up, and I started several of them to see how we would do with that. So The other thing is there's also it's called a California native blue elderberry, and it's native California, and they're growing a lot of these in the northern California and central area as hedgerows between crops. And it's kind of interesting. They started doing some research on it. It might be something you might want to look into and think about. I haven't at this point don't have any experience with using those at all. Final thing I want to talk about is goji berries. So goji berries have become really popular, mainly because of all the health benefits from growing these berries. They're very highly antioxidant. So that means they're great for, helping with any type of problem you might have with like the immune system, your eyes, all of those things that really can really benefit from antioxidants, and that's one of the main reasons people use them. They're also high in beta carotene, so they're great for your skin. That's really important. They found that they may help with the blood sugar level for keeping that under control and helping to help you there. So that's really important too. And traditional Chinese medicine, they're used for treating liver and liver diseases. So there have been a lot of studies on these, and several have proven to be successful. So that's one of the reasons why these goji berries have been so popular. Now, again, you can propagate these from seed if you like, or from cuttings. I've got one here that this one was propagated from a cutting, and this cutting was hardwood cutting that I took actually July 1st of this year. And you can see how fast this grew. This was about a 6-inch cutting that I took. In fact, I'm going to cut these off, but if Christine, if you want to come in, if you can come in closer, you can see one of the flowers there. It's actually they're pretty blue flowers. They're really pretty. And then this one actually even has some fruit that developed on it. There's one right here, another one right here. They're still green. They're still kind of small. But these are really easy to grow from cuttings if you want to get started. The thing that I have learned about these, though, is that when you're buying these, you're really best to get a named cultivar as opposed to growing it from seed, because you're going to get a much better quality fruit. And when I first started, I didn't realize that. I went to a wholesaler, a really large tropical fruit tree wholesaler, and bought my goji berries from the company and planted them, and got very few goji berries. Which I was kind of surprised that nothing much came up at all. That seemed kind of strange to me. And then I went in and I bought some sweet life berries, and these are under the Proven Winners brand. They're a patented plant, and planted some of those, and boy, they took off. They grew really quickly. They got stacks and stacks of berries on them, and they were all really, they actually were sweet tasting, but they were really big producers. And then as I did more research, I realized that, I should have been actually looking for a name cultivar. So that Sweet Life berry is great. There's other ones called Phoenix Tears, which is really, is a Phoenix Tears? Yeah, Phoenix Tears is one that is another one that's out there, cultivar. And I would really go, if you want to grow the goji, I would look online and buy a named cultivar to make sure that you're getting one that that is going to produce really well for you. Otherwise, you may end up with a goji berry that really doesn't produce very much, and that would be kind of a hassle, because they're going to take from a small one, usually a year or so before you're going to get any fruit on it. So that's important. When you're growing them, you want to space them about 3 to 5 feet apart. Again, they're going to grow out, and they're going to get long cane type growth on them. You can cut these back because they actually fruit on the new growth. So cutting it back stimulates that growth. Also, cutting it back opens it up. when you grow them, you may want to grow it on like a trellis where you have wires running down the right and left side of the bush, or putting it so that you can set it up so you can keep these canes from going over, because they will go over quite a ways down if you don't help keep them up. Keeping them upright makes them easier to work with as far as pruning and as far as picking the berries. That's really important. I've heard and read that they're drought tolerant. Again, yeah, they are. They'll take some abuse, but they're not going to fruit very well if you don't keep them moist. I have found that if they do get completely stressed out, they'll actually drop their leaves. They'll look like you've lost them. But if you go back and water them, they'll just come right back really quickly, as long as you catch them before they expire. But again, they're not really a drought tolerant plant, in that if you want to get berries, you want to grow, get good quality berries, you do need to water them. And they take just about the same amount of water as these berries do, and you can water them at least a couple of times a week, heavily mulch them. That's really important. They do like a slightly alkaline soil. So you may want to raise the pH of your soil. That should be helpful in growing them. Not 100% critical, but they do like that a little bit, and that would help out also. Fertilizing is kind of interesting. Some of the studies and some of the things I've read, people say don't even fertilize them at all, or minimal. And so they really, we don't put a lot of fertilizer on our gojis at all. Maybe a third of what we do are berries. That seems to be adequate for them. If you over fertilize them, you're going to get a lot of growth, but you're not going to get very good or very many berries. So that's really, really important to make sure that you're doing that and growing it in that way. As far as harvesting the berries, I found that they tend to, once they start flowering, which is in early summer, usually about the end of June, they'll start flowering, and we'll pick our berries all the way through the summer going into the fall. And it seems like even when we cut them back, we'll get new growth, and we'll actually get berries growing on that new growth. So the actual fruiting season is pretty long as it goes through the summer, and it's we're still experimenting a little bit with the way we actually handle these. So that's really important too, to kind of experiment to see what the best way to get as many berries out of these as possible. As far as pests, we haven't had much of a problem with ours at all. They are a little susceptible to powdery mildew, so you can spray them with a copper if you want to take care of that. That's one way of doing it. They are a little susceptible to mites, so we would use neem oil in there. I haven't really seen any on ours, but that would be one of the ways you can do it. We have discovered that rabbits love these things, and so do the rats. We probably have the healthiest rats in the world eating all these goji berries out there, but we have to keep them out of the area where we grow them. In fact, when we're growing these in our greenhouse area, we actually grow them in cages, because the mice and rats will come and eat these things. As soon as they see any kind of green on it, they'll eat it and take it down. So we actually grow them in these large cages. So that's the only problem we've had as far as pests are concerned with these berries. Well, that pretty much wraps up what I wanted to talk about today. I was wondering if anybody had any other questions they might have about some of the things we talked about.
That was an awesome presentation. Lots and lots of information there. A couple questions that we had, or a couple comments. Blueberry didn't make it through the heat the first year. Any tips to help blueberries survive, or have you had any experiences with blueberries getting them established the first year?
Yeah, we're still working with blueberries, and they really are finicky, especially in the heat. obviously you want to make sure that you've got a southern high bush blueberry. That's what in order to get fruit, they're low chill blueberries. So it's important that you make sure you get one of those. That's what you're going to find in the nurseries. If you buy online, you want to be really cautious to make sure that that's what you're buying, because if you buy a northern high bush, you're not going to get any fruit at all, and the heat is really going to be difficult. The other thing that you might, we're experimenting with growing the berries under some shade cloth, and it looks like we may grow them under maybe about a 30% shade cloth. That might be helpful. Obviously, they take a very high pH soil. You may even want to grow them in a raised bed where you put in just a compost and some type of high organic, high pH substrate to make sure that you have the soil that they want. That's really important, you know. But I have found that the heat, it does have an effect on them, and it seems like once they get really stressed and start going downhill, it's really hard to bring them back. We are not in production with them. We're still kind of experimenting with them, but we've been successful with utilizing the shade cloth. And so I'm looking at actually taking one section of where we're growing grapes and putting them all the way down, maybe about a 70-foot row of them, and putting them into raised beds so we can really control, one, the soil itself. Obviously, watering is important also there, so they don't dry out. They need to stay moist. And then also looking at how we can control by utilizing maybe some shade cloth over the top of these berries. So, but yeah, it seems like once they go south really quick, and it's pretty hard to bring them back.
Great. Yeah, thanks so much. And then just to clarify for us one more time, the primocanes and the floricanes, that's for boysenberries and blackberries?
Well, yeah. So on the all of the blackberries, which would be your whether it be your rec type, which is the like the Chester that we grow, or the trailing type, which is the Olalla berries, which are behind me here, and the boysenberries. Yes, you're going to get. They always fruit on the previous year's growth. So the growth that comes this year, and if you, I don't know if you can see back here, maybe you can, hopefully. You see this green right here? This is this year's growth right here. It's not actually hooked up to the trellis. It went up through the trellis, but it's not really on the trellis per se. We didn't hook it onto the trellis. And if you look, if you can see the row, you'll see between the rows, there's a lot of green. That's all floricanes, or excuse me, primocanes. That's this year's growth. There are not going to be any berries on these whatsoever. Now the brown that you see up here, like right in here, okay, if you can see that, that's floricanes. That's last year's growth that had berries on it this year. Once the plant has berries and it's flowered and put berries on it, it'll never get berries on that cane again. In fact, that cane is just going to die. So you're going to need to cut that cane and get it out of your berry patch. If you don't, you're just going to have more and more of this building up, and it's going to turn into a huge mess after a while. So it's really important that you go in and cut out all of these floricanes once they're done fruiting, and take all of these primocanes, which are green, like here and here, and once you're laying down here, and bring those up onto the trellis, cut them at that 5-foot level, cut the laterals at 8.5 inches, bring the lower laterals up and cut them, and then you'll get fruit on those the following year. That's extremely important. It's interesting, I was doing a thing for the Master Gardeners, and it was information booth somewhere, and the lady came up and said, I've had berries for 4 years now, and I've never gotten a berry off of any of my plants. And I said, well, you prune them? He says, yes, I prune them every year all the way to the ground. I said, well, yeah, if you do that, guess what? You just pruned off next year's growth. And so she never ever got any berries, because she was pruning off the primocanes, which were going to have fruit the following year. So it's really important that you're following that process.
Great. And then just to stick on the pruning question, when and how to prune blueberries?
Okay, so the blueberries that I've had, I haven't had to. You really have to do a lot of pruning. Mainly, I'll prune to kind of open them up a little bit, but you know, they'll grow into a pretty good sized bush. And the main thing with them is to make sure that you're kind of opening them up so that you can get the sunlight into the plant itself. And that's the main reason for pruning them.
Great. And then can you just confirm the distance for your emitter on your drip line?
Okay, so a lot of times people when they're on the berries, we're talking about this is true with the raspberries and the all of the blackberries too, that a lot of folks will put an emitter either right over the crown of that plant, or maybe they put an emitter maybe 6 inches to the right and 6 inches to the left. But what we've done is we go in and we put an emitter every foot all the way down that whole row. So that way we get lateral growth from the roots going out. So the roots are not going to be very deep. You saw when I showed you that roots, they only went down about 5 or 6 inches, but they will grow out this way. So you don't have to worry about them going into the row. In fact, you probably don't want them to do that, especially with raspberries, because they're going to sucker badly, and you're going to be cutting them back all the time. You want the roots to go lateral along where the berries are growing underneath the trellis, so to speak. So to do that, that's why we put them every foot or so, every foot. That way you get that type of a distribution of the water onto the plants. We found that to be really critical. And it really came home when we started seeing this water flow, this free water flow, right, come up right to the ground. And you see the berries in that area are probably 4 times more productive than the ones that were on the right or left side of it, because they basically are getting all of this water. We have very sandy soil here. We have kind of a sandy clay, but it's mostly sandy. So the water really doesn't puddle up so much. It'll kind of move through, the soil, especially that first 3 or 4 inches. But if because you don't want them sitting and be wet all the time, that would cause a root rot. But you do want to keep the roots moist, especially from the time they start flowering until you pick your last berry. You'll get really high quality berries by doing that.
Great. Just a couple more questions here. When you're training raspberries with gardener's tape, when should you remove the tape?
One more time, what was that?
When you're training raspberries with gardener's tape, I think with your tool that you use, when do you
Yeah.
remove the tape?
Oh, okay. So on the raspberries, we really don't tie them onto the trellis. You really don't have to, because you want to use a little different trellis system. And maybe when I was explaining, I didn't explain it that well. With the blackberries, like the Lola berries behind me, we have a single row trellis with 3 wires on it, one at 2 foot, 4 foot, and 5.5, 6 foot. Okay, on raspberries, what you want to do is you want to have a dual a wire going down the sides of your raspberries, so that they're coming up through that wire and going out like this. And that way you don't have to tie them onto that wire. That's the best way to do it. Now, in our case, we actually have a chain link fence on one of our, oops, excuse me 1 second here. That was my call to go turn off the water, but we'll hold off on that. So we have a chain link fence on one side of where we have our raspberries, and we have our wire on the other. So they grow up like this. So we don't have that. We don't have the double wires going the side. But the way you do it is you have your post coming up, and then you have a T coming across like this, and then your wires going out from that. And then your raspberries can grow up like this. And then as the raspberries, if you have your emitters going every foot or so, then they're going to spread out right down through that trellis working, and hopefully their roots are going to kind of keep going straight along that trellis system, so that they don't go off to the side, because they'll go off to the side and then you'll get runners and suckers, and you'll spend all your time cutting those off. Where if they stay in the center, that's much better. Now, the thing you have to do with them is if they get too thick, then you've got to go in and clear some of these canes out, so that you don't have a solid cane situation, and you're removing some of those so that you can get more light into it. But for us, we don't tie our raspberries at all. We only tie our trailing berries, such as the olalla berries and the boysenberries. We do a little bit of training with the Chester blackberries, which are mainly an erect berry. They don't require quite as much help as far as being held onto that trellis, because they don't go over the way the olalla berries and the boysenberries do.
Great. What California native berries were you talking about? I think it was the California elderberry.
Oh, yeah, it was the elderberry. And let me go back to my notes on that, because it was something I ran into a couple of weeks ago. But it's a California native blue elderberry. Sambucus mexicana is the scientific name on it. So Mexicana and you might take a look at it. It was interesting. There've been quite a bit. If you go in and do a search on UC Davis elderberries, you'll see a lot of the research that's been done. But they're using it a lot in hedgerows where they want to attract a lot of beneficial insects into their farm or along the edges of their farm, and that's where they're utilizing these elderberries. And the advantage is that they're looking at it, okay, besides being beneficial in helping with these insects, can we also harvest these also? That's what they're looking at. So it's very interesting. As I mentioned before, the more I get into elderberries and start looking at them, the more intrigued I get about learning about them.
Great. And then last question here. What's your pest control management for rats?
For rats? Wow. Okay. So I probably should have brought a couple of things over here to show you guys. So we have, I don't know where they all come from. Rats and squirrels. I've actually, I've lost count of the squirrels. When we got past 30, I've lost track, and the rats I've lost track too. But basically, there's a couple things you can use. One, there's a cage-like product out there called a Ratinator. You may have heard about it. It's basically a cage that you can put bait in the center of it. We usually use peanut butter or peanuts with peanut butter on them. And basically, the rats can go into this, but they can't get out. So that's one of the ways to get them. And we've had some success with it, not 100%, but we've had some success with using the Ratinator. And so that's one of the ways that you can get rid of the rats. The other thing that I've started using, and I've been really happy with this, because we have used the snap traps, the big rat-tight traps, and I'll set those up, but instead of just setting them out, I'll set them out and I'll put a chain on them, and then I'll hook that up to a tent stake, like a yellow tent stake, so I can see these. I do the same thing with my gopher traps. We use Maccabee gopher traps, and I'll put a chain about so long on it, and then put one of these bright yellow tent stakes hooked onto it, so that I can see where they are, because we've got 6 or 8 of these sets of these traps going all the time. But I've done the same thing with the snap traps, and we've been successful with that too. That way, if you catch one in there, another critter won't come along and take the whole trap and take off with it. So that's been one of the success too. I've heard that that in some cases, when the rats smell blood on the trap, they won't go near it. I'm not sure 100% on that, but there may be some validity, because I've noticed sometimes that we kind of quit catching them. And when that happens, I'll go in and start wash these things down with soap and water and clean them up, and it seems to help a little bit. So that's one of the things we use. Another thing that I started using actually just this year, and it's actually been really successful, not just for rats but also for mice. And it's a little trap, something like similar to the Have a Heart traps. It's about so big. I wish I brought it over. It's about this big, about so square, maybe 8 inches square. It's very sensitive, and when you set it, the rat or the mouse will go in, and they go to the back of it and we bait it with peanut butter. Once they hit that, it's so sensitive, the door will close real quickly, and it seems to work really well. I don't have to worry about having any blood or anything, because you're not trapping it with any kind of mechanical action that would kill the rat. And then what I do is I just take a 5-gallon bucket. You can just take that whole trap. It'll go right into the bucket. Just put it in the bucket, and you'll drown the rat. And but make sure you leave it in there. I did one the other day, and I don't know if I didn't leave it in there long enough or something. I took it out and threw out the rat and came back, and the rat was gone. I don't know if something got it. Within 20 minutes, that rat was gone. But anyway, make sure the rat's drowned before you let him out. But the neat part is you don't have really any scent in there. And it seems like the scent may be a problem when you're trying to catch these rats. It definitely is not a problem if you're trying to catch like squirrels or rabbits. I don't even bait our traps anymore for those. Because we've caught so many, they smell the previous tenant of that trap that went in and got trapped, and they go right in without any bait at all. But with the rats, I've found that peanut butter is the main thing I've used, and I really like these little small traps. If you go online, you'll see them. Just look for like a mouse or rat trap. It's like a little cage about so big around. Unfortunately, I don't have the name of the company, but Kurt, if you want to email me, I'll be happy to supply you guys with the name of that.
Yep. If you wanted to give the information to Christine too while she's there, she can forward it out to us. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, I think that's all we got. Anybody else have any other questions? Some comments here about elderberries that grow along Mountain Road on the way up to Mount Baldy. Yeah, I live up here in Upland, and there was a big tree at a project site I was working at that was like the biggest elderberry tree I've ever seen. So they do really well. I don't think it got much water, so I think they're pretty drought tolerant. But,
yeah, I think, and it might have been one of the California ones that was up there, because those definitely would be drought tolerant.
Yeah, he was monstrous. So
yeah,
yeah, I think that's all we got for questions, unless anybody's got one. Okay, yeah, Mike, thanks so much. That was a great presentation.
Great. Well, great, thank you. I enjoyed having the opportunity to talk with you guys.
Yeah, you too.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, and then just a quick note, real quick, guys, if the members don't mind sticking around, got to do a quick vote here. Lisa has joined us, and she is willing to do both the treasurer position and the secretary position. So everyone else, you guys have a great time. Enjoy your night. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back next month, the first Thursday of the month at 7 p.m. All right. Hey, Nick, you want to jump back on here, buddy?